Some called him the greatest mountain man who ever lived. Others believe he got away with murder. Prepare yourself for the incredible, true story of Sam Burchfield. Our story begins in the deep winter of 1840 in the long blue shadow of Roan Mountain in Carter County, Tennessee. It's here that a boy named Sam Burchfield was born in a small one-room cabin that had been built by his grandfather just 2 generations before in a remote area known as Tiger Valley, an untamed wilderness that was teeming with every imaginable wild animal. In fact, the valley had once been the hunting grounds of the Cherokee just a decade before. Young Sam grew up as much of a creature of this valley as the animals he hunted. In the summers, his feet grew as tough as leather from running across the rocky creek bottoms. And in the winter, he was never without his coonskin cap as he set his rabbit snares along the old trails that had been carved by the Indians. And although Sam was innocent of all book learning, he was highly educated by the mountains that taught him a different kind of literacy. He could read the forest in a way other boys read a primer. A bent blade of grass told him which way a deer had passed. He knew when rain was coming by the smell of the air, and when there would be a frost by the stillness of the birds. And by the time most boys were still clinging to their mother's apron, Sam was slipping through Tiger Valley alone. Indeed, the mountains were his classroom, and the animals were his teacher. By all accounts, the Burchfield family were cut from the same cloth as America's first self-sufficient pioneers. Theirs was a life of total independence that was built with strong backs and skilled hands. They were gunsmiths, coopers, weavers, and tanners. Sam's father could forge a gun barrel from a wagon spring and carve his stock from a maple tree. That's right. If they couldn't craft it themselves, they did without, since the nearest store was a day's hard ride away over the mountains. Not that they ever had much need for store-bought things. They grew all their own food on the steep hillsides and kept a few milk cows and a team of oxen. And, of course, they made all their own liquor, which served as their medicine and their currency. It was well known that the Burchfields had a long-standing reputation for producing some of the purest, most potent Who Shot John in the county. Sam's grandfather was a master distiller who passed on the closely guarded family recipe down to his son. And by the time Sam was tall enough to stand on a stump and look over the top of the copper still, his pa had passed the sacred knowledge to him. And so you see, for the first 2 decades of his life, Sam lived in a state of wild grace, completely free in the paradise of Tiger Valley. But during the 1860s, the long arm of a nation that was tearing itself apart began to reach into even the deepest coves, and eventually the drums of war that had swept across America came to Tiger Valley. And by 1862, just as Sam had taken a new bride, it was duty to country, or perhaps the pull of adventure, that came calling. And Sam, well, he would answer. He enlisted in the 59th Regiment of the Tennessee Confederate Mounted Infantry. For the next 2 years, the mountaineer turned soldier served in the gritty, brutal struggle for the control of the Cumberland Gap, which was a vital supply line that separated Kentucky and Tennessee. But it didn't take long for Sam to realize that this was a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. And it wasn't nary as glorious as those politicians had promised that it would be. And after 2 years of nearly starving on dwindling rations of salt pork and cornbread, Sam Burchfield was finally mustered out of service in 1864, where he walked back to Tiger Valley. Yet, when Sam returned home, he found that it wasn't the paradise that he'd left. Like so many families across the South, the Civil War had broken the Burchfield's way of life. The valley had been terrorized by bushwhackers from both sides who used the war as an excuse for robbing and plundering. Several times they had descended on the homestead, looting the smokehouse, driving off the livestock, and stealing anything they could carry. And the self-sufficient world that Sam's family had built was left scarred and emptied. Sam knew that his family needed a fresh start and a new place to rebuild. So, with a heavy heart for what was lost and a flicker of hope for what might be, Sam, his bride, his parents, and all his brothers and sisters loaded up their wagons and their grandpa's copper steel, and they turned their backs on Tiger Valley and set out for a new home. 150 miles away on a high, lush valley known as Cades Cove. And here, Sam Burchfield was about to become one of the most legendary men in American history. Now, Sam Burchfield was quite the spectacle of a mountain man. He stood 6'4" in his socks, with a thick mane of long, coal-black hair that he curled and kept as clean as any woman ever aspired to. And look at that beard, would you? Even the prophets of the Old Testament would have stood in awe at the majestic crop of whiskers that Sam proudly wore on his face. And what a sight he was for anyone who happened to encounter him, riding on his Jenny with an old quilt tossed across her back for a saddle and a looped logging chain thrown across that quilt that served as stirrups for his boots. He never left his house without his 5-foot-long flintlock bean rifle that was over 100 years old, laid across his shoulder with a jug of moonshine in his other hand. Now, Sam was the type of man who stood behind his word at all cost. If he looked you in the eye and made you a promise while shaking your hand, you best believe that he'd go to his grave before he'd ever break that promise. He would go out of his way to help a friend in need. But he was also the type of man you didn't dare cross, because if you did, he wouldn't stop at nothing to settle a score with anyone who cheated him. Well, anyhow, it wasn't long after Sam settled in the Chestnut Flats area of Cades Cove and lived happily with the 700 souls that called the Mountain Valley home, that soon he became one of the most likable and respected men in the area. Sam built a watermill on his property, which he allowed all of his neighbors to use free of charge. He shared his bear and deer meat with any family that was in need, and he even donated his time helping to build the Primitive Baptist Church. But whenever Sam wasn't doing charitable work, you could find him working the old copper kettle that he had carefully hid on his property. Just like his father and grandfather before him, Sam was a highly respected purveyor of stump water, and most folks in the cove appreciated this high-quality product, which they used for medical benefits as well as being consumed by the gallons at every barn dance. That's right, it wasn't long before Sam was pumping out white lightning from his faithful 100-gallon still, where he would haul it by the wagon load down to the general store in Cades Cove and sell it wholesale to the store owner, who would then distribute it far and wide to those thirsty flatlanders down in Maryville and Knoxville. And as you might imagine, it didn't take long for those revenuers to begin making trips up to Sam's place looking for his hidden still. And as for Sam, well, he didn't believe there was any crime in turning corn into liquid. The real crime was getting caught. And for most of the time, the crafty mountaineer was always one step ahead of the law. And each time they tried to catch him, he'd be tipped off and move his still to a different location. Now, Sam got away with this for decades, and the law, well, they couldn't stop him. He hid his setup so well that many times the posses of lawmen would become lost for days in the mountains, so much so that Sam himself would have to go rescue them before they starved to death. However, that all began to change in the 1890s. Several times, Sam's operation was raided, and he was hauled down by wagon to the Maryville jail and booked on moonshine charges. That's his mugshot from his first arrest right there. Now, most of the time he made bail and beat the charges in court, and even became more legendary in his stubborn refusal to indict or name anyone else who was involved in his distribution network. But that all changed in early 1892 when a man named George Powell, who was also involved in the industry of turning liquid corn into currency, snitched on Sam and even led authorities to his still. Burchfield was promptly arrested, and this time he would serve 6 months in the Blount County Jail. Now, Sam would never forget the experience of being locked up and caged like an animal for doing nothing more than exercising his God-given right to make Mountain Dew. Nor would he ever forgive the man who snitched on him. That's right. For the next few years, Sam fumed over his conviction, and it all came to a head on a sunny December day in 1897. And what happens here has remained a mystery to this very day. You see, George Powell came home from a hard day's work where he was greeted by his wife and children in the front yard. And as his 3 kids clung to his leg, a single shot rang out from the forest, and George was shot through the shoulder. He ran towards his house and collapsed at his door, where his wife drug him into the house and locked the door. Too scared to leave the cabin and go for help, instead, she waited until sunrise the next day to summon a doctor. But by then, George Powell was dead. But just who pulled that trigger? Was it Sam Burchfield or another rival of George's? After all, a man who makes it a habit of snitching is bound to make a fistful of enemies.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 5 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller today.
Wagon tongue set the cove afire with theories, and finally, an emergency meeting was held down at the Baptist church to try and get to the bottom of it. And it was there, before a packed house, that one woman stood up and announced that she had seen Sam Burchfield's son-in-law tearing down Abrams Creek just moments after that gunshot rang out. Just like that, Sam's son-in-law, Hale Hughes, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. At the trial, the prosecution presented evidence that the person who committed the crime left a trail of size 11 boot prints leading away from the cabin. And it just so happened that Hale Hughes also wore a size 11. And with no further evidence, Hale Hughes was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. And it seemed for a time that the case was solved in the mind of the folks in Cades Cove. And that was until 2 years later, when Hale Hughes had a change of heart and wrote a letter from prison to the local newspaper, where he shared the details of what he said really happened that fateful day. According to his story, both he and Sam Burchfield were positioned at different vantage points surrounding George Powell's cabin. And he claimed that while he had every intention to shoot George himself, it was actually Sam who pulled the trigger. Just like that, the case was reopened and Burchfield was arrested for the murder in June of 1899. And despite a media sensation, the grand jury failed to indict him, and Sam was released. The irony of this entire incident was that during the murder investigation, Sam's photos and life and times as an independent mountaineer and stubborn moonshiner who refused to pay taxes were splashed on the front pages of newspapers all over East Tennessee. And slowly, Sam actually became a folk hero for his brazen ability to outsmart and openly defy the law. And it wasn't just an image, because Sam never stopped with his last arrest for untaxed liquor coming in 1907 when he was at the ripe old age of 67. Finally, the government figured if they couldn't stop him, they might as well hire him. And they did, literally. In 1910, at the World's Appalachian Exposition that was held in Knoxville, Tennessee, the United States government astonishingly gave Sam Burchfield a legal permit to operate his moonshine still out in public for an entire month at the exposition. A staggering 350,000 people came from all over America to watch the wily old mountaineer work the copper kettle like a true master. Even a United States federal judge came all the way from Atlanta, and federal revenuers came all the way from Washington, D.C. to marvel at Burchfield's skills.
In the winter of 1840, beneath the mountain sky, in a Tiger Valley cabin, we heard young Sam's cry. Played where Cherokee once hunted and panthers wandered at will. He learned to read the forest, the ways of wood and hill. Granddad's copper-hidden timber by a spring so dark and cold. By 12 he knew the family craft and secrets never told. Outsmarted the law in them Smoky Mountains towns, copper kettle bubbling, corn to shine so fine. Uncle Sam Burchfield, a legend in his time. He marched to Cumberland Gap when the drums of war did sound. Came home thin to a valley, burned but trampled down. They loaded up that copper still and rode to Cage Cove Green. Built a mill and shared his meat, kept his white lightning unseen. Climbed the hills, but he moved before they came. They'd wander lost in Laurel while he fanned the flame. Till now these sevens, a rifle crack split chestnut flights in two, and whispers name Sam for what no court can prove. Jug and his rifle long, white lightning flowing, singing freedom song. From Tiger to Cage Cove, he carved his name through war and whiskey, law and flame, copper kettle bubbling through the mountain pine. Uncle Sam Burchfield, legend for all time.
As an old man, Sam Burchfield was immortalized as one of the greatest men to ever live in the Smoky Mountains by best-selling author Horace Kephart in his 1913 epic book titled Our Southern Highlanders, where Sam was mentioned alongside other legends such as Black Bill Walker and Levi Trenholm. I've featured both of their stories here on the channel, and if you hadn't seen them, well, you're in for a treat. Be sure to check them out. As for Sam, well, he eventually turned the moonshine operation over to his sons, who continued pumping out the Mountain Dew all the way up until the family's property was taken by eminent domain in the 1930s by the federal government to turn their homes into the Smoky Mountains National Park. And as for Sam, Well, in his old age, he turned his life over to the Lord before he finally passed away in 1917. And if you ever find yourself in Cades Cove in the Smoky Mountain National Park, be sure to stop by the Primitive Baptist Church and take a walk through the small cemetery in the back. And there, you'll see a tombstone that reads, Sam Burchfield, lived from 1840 to 1917 and known as the long hair of Chestnut Flats. Indeed, what a life he lived. What about you, my friend? What do you think of old Sam? Was he an outlaw, a folk hero, or somewhere in between? I look forward to reading your comments below. Thanks so much for watching this episode, and as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.